This is the orphan girl that the Cuthberts are looking after. Anne Shirley, this is the Reverend and Mrs. Allen.
How are you, Anne?
Well in body, although considerably rumpled in spirit, thank you.
One of the things I've always thought about Anne was, and she's an extraordinarily appealing character, but except for things like Pollyanna and Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, which are they're okay, but they're really terribly sentimental, I think Anne was one of the first of the sort of real people heroines. I think that's part of the endearing charm of Anne, is that you get this wonderful vision. Almost the entire success of that was simply Megan Follows at the time was almost the right age. She was a little bit older than Anne. And I think a lot of the temperament and the sensibility, somehow Megan at her age was able to plug into. She got the clothes. The fact that if you look carefully at the stuff that she comes out of the orphanage, she's got strings in her boots and they've got holes in the soles. And, her hair's done up with two different bits of ribbon. And Megan understood all of what I was trying to say about Anne with those clothes. I came from the theater, and Colleen Dewhurst was one of the great icons of the American theater. And so it was a bit intimidating. And also, as there always is in the theater or film, there's a lot of gossip, and Colleen did come with a lot of baggage as a kind of monster in human form, which for me anyway, personally, proved to be not entirely correct. I think like a lot of actors, and this may seem like a strange thing to say, but Colleen, she was not very interested in clothes. One day Colleen would be totally into the clothes and, the corset and the boots and the whole 9 yards. And then the next day she wouldn't. And on the days that she just didn't, I think she just didn't want to be bothered. I think it was just part of her personality. And everybody who's ever worked, the horror stories about Colleen Dewhurst in costumes are legion in the American theater and film psyche. And everybody who ever worked with her said exactly the same thing, that you just keep your fingers crossed, hope that this is a good day and that she's actually wearing what you've designed. But she was an extraordinary woman. I have always been fanatically fond of Western movies. And I was determined to, talk to Richard Farnsworth about this. Well, I just started asking him some very technical questions because I knew that he had done a lot of the stunt writing in Red River, which is one of my favorite movies. And I was, asking him how on earth John Ford shot all this stuff. And I suppose one of my favorite memories of him is, he came to me one day with I can't even describe it as a handkerchief. It was really a sort of grotty old bandana. And I realized that this had some memory because he wanted to wear it. And I said, well, this really isn't a bandana part, but let's see what else we can do with it. And so I said, the scene in the barn, you might just have it in your pocket. Well, of course, it turned out that the bandana belonged to John Wayne. So we were both in seventh heaven. Could I touch it, please? No, he was a wonderful man. And because his career had not been as an actor, he was a very unactorly actor. I think that, the young, they were teenagers. I think they were a bit intimidated by the process and intimidated by all the attention they were getting. And Jonathan, again, demonstrated a lot of talent in that film, but I think my principal recollection of him is that, he's like, what am I doing here? And there was a lot of that. He was a very cooperative and very nice young man, as he's grown up to be a very nice older man. Kevin was very keen to use Pat. The clothes, most of them were rented, and they were rented in England, and English women tend to be smaller. And Pat was not. She was not, grotesque, but she was a substantial lady. And she wanted this part as much as Kevin wanted her to do it. But the condition was that the clothes had to fit her because Kevin simply didn't have the budget to make a whole bunch of new clothes for Pat. And I had known Pat before as an actress, and I said, we'll find stuff that will work. And we had this hilarious fitting. It was on a Saturday because Pat was in a play somewhere, and that was the only time that was available to do it. So she came up, and I had picked out stuff that I either knew would sort of fit her or could be altered to make it fit her. and Kevin was there, very concerned that this wasn't going to work and he was going to have to find somebody else to play the part. Anyway, so we started in this fitting, and in fact, most of the clothes didn't fit her at all, but I'd only brought things to the fitting that I knew could be altered. And most of them, when Kevin saw them, had safety pins up the back because that was how they were going to fit her. And I said, now, Pat, the trick is to get everybody happy. Just don't turn around because they look okay from the front. And I'm sure Kevin knew what I was up to, but I was happy. Pat got the part and she was wonderful. I think the biggest challenge was that outside the CBC in those days, it was probably the biggest costume project that had been done here, and realizing that these costumes were not entirely available in Canada. I mean, we used a lot of stuff that we could find that was available here, but the bulk of the first two ends came from England. But you never know in any project that it is going to be either the success it is or the huge failure that it is, whichever way it goes. And there was always a certain amount of that with Anne, but it became very apparent very early on that this was, as I said, like a good train coming down the tracks, that it was just going to keep going and be an enormous success, which subsequent events have proved that it was.